Hello. In this lecture, we're going to review the tutorial, the React app tutorial from the official React site, reactjs.org. Tutorial, Intro to React. It says here that the tutorial doesn't assume any existing React knowledge, but it's actually a fairly difficult tutorial to follow, so which hence these videos. Before we start the tutorial, there's some setup here and some information about it. We're building let's show the final result here. We're building a tic-tac-toe game here. So that notice that React is tracking whose turn it is and declaring winners. And X has won here. It also has this history. We're not going to do this section here of history to go back, but we will get the gameplay going here as we work through this tutorial and understand what's happening here. So the tutorial gives you two different ways to go. It says write code in the browser. That's that environment here. CodePen.io. Some people like that. I prefer to build in a local development environment, so I can refer back to the code that I've worked through in the tutorial locally and reinforce its lessons. So we're going to follow, or you're going to follow these optional setup instructions to set this up, and then we'll start going through this code. So I assume that you have followed setup option number 2. This expands here, and follow these instructions to get what we have here on the right. Let's go through this code. And again, this is just the initial code that sets up our structure. So the structure here is good for a tutorial. They put everything inside index.js. And if you've seen the results of Create React App, you know that index.js is actually a very simple component. It's the Kickstarter. It's essentially equivalent to main in a traditional application. It's the entry point for it. So it, in the Create React App version, goes and starts app.js as its main component. And app.js is really the component that is the home for all the other components that go into the React application. Now, the way they've structured this tutorial is not the way you'd structure a commercial application. It puts everything, as we've said, in index.js. All the classes. So there's 3 classes here. They've decomposed it. Good for a tutorial because it shows everything in a single file, and we can see everything very conveniently. If you were doing this in a real environment or production environment, you'd maintain app.js, and then all the components that are shown in the single file would be in files of their own, modules of their own, JavaScript modules of their own. So let's look at the components. Again, we're building a tic-tac-toe game. So we have an individual square that we see here, the board itself, and then the game. So let's look at each one of these and see the current state of this. So the square, extends React component, creates a button with a class named square. And you can look at the CSS here. It has the styling necessary to create a plain square on the board. Okay. The tutorial's focus is not the CSS. That's what's happening here. Class name square. We don't use class in JSX, which is what this is. It looks like HTML, but it's really JSX. Because JSX is a JavaScript extension, we have to obey JavaScript rules. Class is a keyword in JavaScript, so we can't use class for calling out the class. So we use class name in React. So class name equals square, and then that applies as class would in a normal HTML file, this square, right, which sets up a plain white box. Then let's look at the board component. So if we say the board component has a render square function here that, as we can see, creates or declares a React square that's up here. So when render is called on it says next player X, that's hard coded. Status next player X we expect to see. And then we see board rows being created. 3 board rows to match the tic-tac-toe board rows. 3 board rows rendered in 1, the next 3, and the next 3. So in all, it's going to call render square 9 times with the ID of the button. So passes a parameter here. So that calls this, and it ignores this parameter for now, but it's setting it up for future development. And then it returns a square. Then the game itself is a shelter, or as a component, it contains a board and then some game info. So the board and the game info are what's in the game component itself. This is very simple with some to-dos here, and we'll fill it out as the tutorial goes. Okay. Finally, we get to react-dom.render, which is the normal contents of index.js. That kicks off the whole thing. Game is rendered, then game renders board, and board renders the 9 squares. Let's go to terminal, do this, and then npm start, and we'll see our initial look. So we have our initial look here. It's not interactive because this is a button. It doesn't have a click method yet, so it's our starter here. So we have next player X. We can see that here. Our modification of it. I had to hit refresh on the browser, which I've seen before, but normally the browser will refresh. All right, so we've begun our tutorial. Let's fill it out.